Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Hosai, so delighted that you could make it today with us. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Sumaya. Alhamdulillah. I feel like this has been a long time in the making, or we've been wanting to do this for a while. So I'm so honored. Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, you are definitely a master of many trades. Could you please introduce yourself? And don't be modest.
Thank you. Well, my name is Hosai Mojaddidi. Alhamdulillah. I'm currently in California where I reside with my husband and two boys. I'm an educator. I've been, alhamdulillah, active in the Muslim community for a long time, just in the capacity of teaching. I teach currently at three different institutions, alhamdulillah, here locally, middle school and college level, tajweed, alhamdulillah, middle school logic debate and Islamic studies. But I also give talks periodically for the community on various different topics, including marriage and family and relationships, emotional intelligence, various different topics, Sirah, Quran. So, alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mhm.
So, what motivated me to contact you regarding this topic is that someone reached out to me and she told me that her husband is in an affair. I'm not sure if it's one or if there are multiple, and there's absolutely nothing that she can do. She just has to stand back and watch because she is not in the financial position to leave. She has children, and she just wanted some support about how to handle this. So, jumping off that, why don't you start off defining what are the different types of infidelity there are out there?
Sure, subhanAllah. I wish I could say that I was shocked to hear this, but unfortunately, as you know, and I think many people who are working within the community hear these stories. They're not maybe broadcast, which is a good thing. Alhamdulillah, we still have some degree of modesty and shame about these things, but they do occur, these incidents of cheating and infidelity. So infidelity, I think we all generally know what it is. It's basically breaching the marital contract, and this can be done in an emotional way, in a physical way. There's different conceptions, and for some people, it's subjective anyway. But I did find an interesting article that I thought encapsulated the different forms of infidelity and how they can manifest. So it identified that there's five different actually cases, and maybe there's other opinions, but in this case, they defined the five types of infidelity as opportunistic, obligatory. I thought that term was interesting, but I'll explain. Romantic, conflicted romantic, and then commemorative. And it's an article anybody can access, but the five types of infidelity. But the idea of that people cheat for different reasons and impulses, right? That there's usually something that either it precedes the marriage itself. People have history, they have trauma, whatever issues, or even previous relationships that may manifest or come like if things that happen in that relationship may be at play. Or there's, for example, in the first example of opportunistic infidelity, it's just a situation arises and a person succumbs, right? So it's like something is offered, an indecent proposal. Remember, I don't know if you remember that film, but there's a indecent proposal. There's something that happens, or in the case of people hopefully outside of our community, this doesn't apply to people within the community, but there may be a situation where a person uninhibited, they may be using alcohol or drugs. Maybe they're in a social setting, a party setting, and because they're not fully cognitively there, they're impaired there, they may act upon an offer because the opportunity presented itself. So that is not, that's one example of infidelity. And then the obligatory is that it says here that this type of infidelity is based on the fear that resisting someone's sexual advances will result in rejection. And that's one I thought was interesting, because it goes on to say that people can have like feelings of sexual desire, love, and attachment for their partner, but still end up cheating because they need approval. So there's this sense of, maybe deep insecurity, obviously within themselves, that even though they're in a committed relationship, that if they reject someone outside of themselves, that it kind of feeds into their insecurities, and they need that validation. So it could be a situation like that, right? And then the romantic infidelity This is, about people who may not have an emotional attachment in their marriage. So, and there are plenty of people who marry for other than love, right? Or other than a real bond. It could be a marriage of convenience or family, situation. So because they're missing that component within their marriage, then they step out. So that's the romantic. The conflict romantic is kind of like a variant of that. It's where you would have this with more than one person at a time. So it's kind of like, you really want love and bonding, and you may find that you're open to being promiscuous even in the pursuit of romance. And then the last one is called the commemorative infidelity, and this occurs, they say, when a person has no feelings for their partner, there's no sexual desire, love, attachment, anything, but only a sense of like some, again, obligation keeping the couple together. And for that reason, the person steps out. So I think this is unfortunately common in some of our cultures, and where people are married for, again, like other than love. And so they may again just be in the marriage not because they want to be at all, but they don't really feel that there's a way out for them, and then their reason, or the reason for cheating is because they have no choice, or that's at least what they tell themselves. So those are just in a nutshell, pretty quick, but I thought it's helpful to kind of again see that infidelity is quite common in many. I would say in all cultures. I don't know of any culture that could say that, oh, we don't have this problem, because it's a human problem, right? These are things that human beings have to contend with, and that's why I think when we look at the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in multiple verses, he warns about indecency, fahish, fawahish, these things. In Surah Al-Isra, he literally says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولا تقربوا زنا إنه كان فاحشة وساء سبيلا. Do not approach, like don't even go near unlawful, right, sexual intercourse or relationships. And this, can be applied to both premarital, but also extramarital. Indeed, it is ever an immorality and an evil way. So shunning it entirely, don't go near it, don't approach it, don't go, toward anything that would even lead to it, which is really, I think, the conversation that Muslims need to be having, because it's a slippery slope, right? Once you allow yourself to break from the boundaries of Sharia when it comes to male-female relationships, then I think you're on a very, very dangerous path. So
in your experience in our Muslim community, do you find that there's one type that is more prevalent than the others, or you see all kinds?
I've heard, and I mean, unfortunately, I've heard so many different stories over the years about different types. Some, for example, I don't know if they would fit, exactly into these categories that we read, but I think maybe a mix of a few. There's certainly cases I've heard where a beautiful wife, for example, who takes care of herself, is very fit, is very on top of her, presentation, is available in that department, does not in any way withhold, has found herself dumbfounded to know that her husband has been not only having extramarital affairs, but so, choosing to use services, and so that could be very shocking, right? Because you wonder, like, how does that fit into all of this? But then the explanation is that, there are certain things that some men, because of their history prior to marriage, that they're more comfortable doing with, as they coin it, these are not our terms, a sex worker, right? So a sex worker can do more things than a wife, or they're not as comfortable asking their Muslim wife, who's the mother of their children, to do certain things, but they are comfortable seeking those things out with a professional, quote unquote. So I've heard that, and I've heard other stories of, unfortunately, people that are close to the couple, whether it's other couples. I mean, I've heard of other married couples, finding ways to socialize with other couples so that there could be opportunities, like it would increase their chances to have their little time with each other in the home of one or the other. I've heard a lot of different things over the years, and so that is always perplexing, because they they're playing a very serious and dangerous game. They're risking being caught. So now you have to get into the deep psychology. Like, okay, so is it really for love? Is it because there's something missing in the marriage? Or are you just taunting and teasing, and is this a game for you? Because to do something like that in the home while your partner is there, and while the other person's partner is there, sharing, occupying the same space, as well as other guests, as well as children in the home. Yeah, you'd be shocked. I mean, I've heard some pretty appalling examples. So I don't know if they all would necessarily fit into a box here, but I do think that individual subjective pathologies, obviously spiritual diseases, some real perverse things can impact why a person would cheat.
Okay, so you mentioned, for example, scenarios of being with someone in the workspace or being with a sex worker. Did you cover pornography as well as a type of infidelity?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think this is probably the most common one that I've heard from a lot of different Muslim women. I mean, I've been in conferences where I've spoken, and then immediately after, you have people coming up to you, what do I do? Um, Recently that actually happened to me. It wasn't, it was pornography was one part of it, but it was also a close family relative that had come into the home, and the wife was just in shambles because she had learned all of these things. So, but pornography is very common, and unfortunately, with I think a lot of the marital cases that I've worked on, it's almost always there. There's some aspect of it, like whether it was the husband having, or and by the way, because I think we need to be really fair here, just in general, when we talk about cheating, infidelity, any form of it, it's not a male only issue. The culprits can be both. Women cheat as well, so I just want to put that out there. But even in the case of pornography, there are women who also consume it, unfortunately. And so it can be both. And it affects the marriage in many ways. One is when a spouse finds out that their spouse has been watching it, and that's obviously feels like a big betrayal. But in other cases, it's when a spouse is watching it as a means of trying to exploit their spouse, or trying to force them into certain acts, because that's how their needs are going to be met. So it can be used in multiple ways, but it's unfortunately quite pervasive.
So what would you say or advise a woman do when or even a man, when they are faced with this knowledge that, oh my goodness, this is what my partner's doing, and those intense, shocking, and probably traumatizing feelings that are coming up? What should you do?
That's a good question. It's obviously something that we can explore to help people who may find themselves in these very painful and difficult circumstances. And I would always advise to not act impulsively, because emotions, when they override the brain, can actually be quite harmful. And so we always want to maintain a state of a rational mind. And so even though it's very painful, it's very difficult, and you may want to react to the situation, by reacting, that could open up a huge can of worms in many ways. People become violent, they become incensed, they may say certain things, they may do certain things. So you just want to really be cautious to put yourself out of a situation where you would react in any way that could potentially backfire on you. I mean, especially if there are children involved, there's just so many ways that the scenario can go sideways. So I would say try to stop, pause, and allow yourself to really process and make sure that you have the accurate picture of what's happening before any type of a confrontation or a reaction with your partner. Because sometimes we jump quickly, right? We jump the gun, or we have knee-jerk reactions to these things, but we haven't gathered all the information. We don't have the right accurate presentation of what's happening. So just take some time, give yourself time to process and to even find, if you have a confidant, someone that you can trust with something like this. It's such a private matter that I'm hesitant to tell people to quickly contact someone, because I think we need to make sure that, again, we have all of our kind of ducks in a row, as they say, and that we're really acting on knowledge, not on suspicion, not on things that may not necessarily be true, because I've seen that actually do far more harm when a person reacts quickly to something that they think was infidelity or cheating, or they're kind of sloppily putting some case together, and then they go and they kind of drop all these bombs and threats and ultimatums, and it just turns into this really terrible scenario, because again, we're not acting with wisdom, we're not acting with knowledge. Information has to be processed. So take time to do that. If you feel like it's too much for you and you're completely falling apart, then hopefully you have a person that you can entrust with that, but that person needs to have taqwa. And I would say that has to be a prerequisite. Don't rely on someone who's just a good listener, who's just a good friend to you, to be the confidant who's going to bear something of this magnitude. They have to have that knowledge and fear of God first, to keep the amana, the trust, but also to help you to stay in a rational state of mind. And if they're going to be, and the reason why I say this is because I found that especially in the world of women anyway, in female relationships, we tend to rely on those sympathetic ears, those people that we obviously are very bonded with emotionally, but they don't always have wisdom. They don't always give us good counsel. They are there for us, and they may even get really ignited. They may get more angry than we are. How could he? Oh my God, let's go do this to him. And you see these women who just fan the flames, unfortunately, because they think that's what a good friend or good sister should do. And that actually ends up just causing so much irreparable damage. Whereas when you have a person who is upright, who's God-fearing, who has taqwa, who really can be, emotionally stable in that time, they will help you to make sure that you do not make any mistakes or poor decisions, or do anything irrational or harmful. So first, remember, tawakkal ala Allah. Allah is with those who are harmed, hurt. He's with you. So just be patient, especially if you're innocent. If you didn't do anything wrong, you have to remember Allah is with me. And he will help you to see this through if you put your trust in him, slow down, and make sure you're doing everything with accuracy, or at least the best that you can, information. And if you want to eventually confront your partner after having done all that, I think there should be a path to do that allows for a confession of sorts, because that would, in my experience, when you allow for a person to confess to you, as opposed to having all the receipts and just laying accusation after accusation, you're actually, I think, compromising the path of redemption for them. Admitting mistakes is a big part of, making sure that you are righting your wrong. But if they're already being admitted for you, it takes that off of the plate, right? It's like, oh, you already know everything. I guess I don't have to do that deep work of confessing what I've done to you, So I would say be very careful not to make it too easy for the person by saying, I know exactly what you've done. I know this and that and this and that. You should just give them an opportunity and say, I have come to learn certain things. I'm giving you an opportunity to tell me the truth. Full disclosure. And then you'll really, I think, see whether or not this person has redeeming qualities, or if they're going to spin narratives, gaslight you, distort facts, turn it around. Turning the tables is a very common tactic that people who cheat may use. Blaming you, in other words, like it's your fault, you don't do this. So you don't want to, they'll reveal themselves eventually, but I think my point is, if you're going to confront them, do it thoughtfully, do it methodically, do it strategically, and give them the opportunity to actually face the music. If you, as they say, you're going to do the crime, you have to pay the time.
So in terms of confrontation, which you've gone into, you saying that it's better to make the person face up. What about if she or he is so emotionally overwhelmed and they can't do that? Could she get like some kind of a representative, a mediator of some sort to approach the subject on her behalf?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think if you feel that you cannot, it's too difficult of a conversation for you to have directly with your spouse, but you do want there to be that, confrontation, then certainly you can entrust again that confidant. But I would say, discretion and protecting the integrity of the relationship it should be far more important than seeking a sympathy, because I feel like sometimes in our feeling of being hurt and our feeling of being betrayed, the reason why we may reach out is because we're so sorry for ourselves. It's so painful to be cheated on. It feels horrible. It feels awful. So the reason why we may seek to confront or to ask for, to find a confidant or to confide in someone may end up not really being what's in our best interest. And so if that's the case, then that person, are they going to really be able to advocate for you if you haven't really vetted them to be the right, to be offering you what you really need, which is a strong person who's an advocate. That's what you need in that moment. You don't need just someone who's listening to you and sympathizing with you and giving you, like, emotionally coddling you. So I think, again, I'm maybe I'm overthinking it, but I just feel like I'm cautious to say, or to involve too many people in that very vulnerable initial time, because eventually there may be, especially if the marriage doesn't eventually dissolves, or there's a path now to the dissolution of the marriage, you're going to be bringing in family members and maybe other people, and it just kind of gets really complicated. But in that initial period where you've just discovered that your partner is cheating, be very careful. I would just really caution involving too many people, and only if you have a person who's a true muttaqi person. But other than that, maybe bolstering oneself and trying to work on finding that courage within oneself and asking Allah to give you that fortification to be able to confront this person. Again, we're talking about this hypothetically and theoretically, but I think maybe there's some wisdom in that, because we can give people some pause to think through their decisions as opposed to reacting. And I'm always trying to, advise people to not react, because I've seen the reactions cause so much harm. So,
what are red flags that a spouse is being unfaithful?
Sure. Well, I think in the age of, these medium that we all have now with cell phones and different ways of hiding information, it becomes very difficult. I feel like people are much more secretive now, and there's entire apps and websites that actually encourage and endorse cheating and helping cheaters to be. It's shocking to even think of that, but there are very sick people out there. So I think we want to be very careful to not also cross the line of looking for trouble, right? Like, we shouldn't be suspicious. This is Surah Al-Hujurat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it. When you open the door of suspicion and you're constantly paranoid and thinking that, oh, this must be happening, that's why red flags are a little tricky, because people start to presume things. It's like, oh, that's a red flag. I read it in an article. So you want to be careful not to start to do that. It's always good to have an awareness of general, I think, habits, general changes and shifts, not necessarily particular behaviors, but generalized kind of patterns where you see a person. For example, if you, had an open book policy when it comes to your email, your phone, there was never an issue between both spouses, kind of like an agreement. But all of a sudden, a spouse is now putting passwords and kind of suddenly, preventing their spouse from accessing certain things, that would certainly be concerning. Like, what happened? We're supposed to have this open sort of trust policy. Obviously, any things that would seem obviously suspicious. If you're going to see relationships or communication that is crossing a boundary, like if you have a partner who observes the rules of gender interactions, right, and you've always known that to be the case, you observe the rules of gender interactions with non-mahram, and everything's fine, but all of a sudden you're seeing your spouse offering their non-mahram coworker rides and talking on the phone through all late hours of the evening. That's a breach, right? That's suspect. That's something to certainly be like, what's going on? We have an agreement. We don't do these things. How would you feel if I were to give my coworker a ride home, or I'm going to go out to coffee with them? What, like, these are not our ways, and I know we live in societies where a lot of these things are seen as not a big deal. People going out, having a meal and doing these things. But for us, these are breaches of appropriate male-female relationships. So any breach that is out of the norm, behavior that's out of the norm, I would say would be certain red flags. But I'm just cautious to give too many, because I've seen, again, people read into things, and then that starts to make them hyper suspicious, and that is a recipe for disaster in a marriage. Because if you allow yourself to read into every little thing, you're just going to cause problems and argumentation, which will actually eventually, potentially anyway, lead to the distrust and then the desire to step out, right? Because if you feel like your spouse doesn't trust you and they're constantly accusing you of things, I've heard people say that, well, I might as well do it since you keep accusing me. So it's amazing, how ironic that is. But I would say certainly look for big changes, withdrawal, any type of withdrawal from your partner, like they're not emotionally available to you. They don't seem to be interested in spending time with you anymore. They want to keep going out with friends, or the excuses they have. And the general ones with work, working late, not coming home. Like if it's one off, okay, fine, there's a big deadline. But if you're seeing weekend after weekend, your partner suddenly has these major deadlines all the time, every day, every weekend, I would certainly look into that and go, what's going on? Ask the right questions. Have your responsibilities at work increased? And then, in terms of even community involvement, because believe it or not, even within our own community, there are people who may use like volunteering or working in the masjid as excuses to allow themselves access to people that they may be, may have developed feelings for, or maybe even exploring, God forbid, the possibility of acting out on. They may be using, seemingly innocent, situations to find that. So, but if you start to see, again, just a major shift away and a break away from normal behavior, I would say that's probably the biggest red flag.
So, Hosai, once there's been an admission or a discovery, maybe the person's in denial, what happens next? Because someone might think, what do I do now? Do I pack my bags and leave while this whole marriage is in upheaval and we come up to a solution? Or do I stay here? Do we work it through? What if the person, the perpetrator, is saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I won't do it again. I was meaning to tell you. Or maybe he'll say, well, I don't care. As the person I started mentioning, I don't give a damn. This is what I'm doing. What next? What's the path?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very loaded question with the lot that I could offer, but I think every situation is going to be different, because you have to look at your individual circumstances and what your threshold is. And a lot of people may think like, oh, out of fear, for example, that if this marriage doesn't last, the fear may prevent them from actually acting in their own best interests. Because if you're going to excuse infidelity, then that could potentially open the door for a lot of harm. Obviously your rights are being taken, but also physical harm. I mean, I know people who kind of didn't necessarily excuse it, but they were so afraid it's like a paralysis of doing anything about it, that they in a way allowed it to go on, and then later they find out that they have contracted a sexually transmitted disease. So it's like, what do? You've now harmed yourself, because of this thinking that it's going to just go away miraculously on its own, or if I don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist. That doesn't work. So you have to really, I think, factor everything, factor, the fallout of this continuing, or the potentiality of it continuing, and whether or not what that means for you, especially if it's proven. Like if it's suspicion and you don't really know for a fact, if the person's denying it, there isn't really any solid evidence, then it comes about trust. Can you establish trust with this person again? Can you ever, look at them the same way? And there are some people who may really feel like that they can, and even if the partner may do a total 180 and reverse everything, and be willing to work on themselves, go to therapy, offer a lot of things, and they're actually really, really committed, they're very apologetic, they're very remorseful. I think it just depends on what you're dealing with, but I don't think these decisions can be made rashly, or like there's a quick fix for any person. And that's where, if you're not sure what to do, I think you absolutely need to bring in trusted confidants and people that you've appointed to help you make those decisions. Because family members, hopefully your, mahram, if you have, your living parents, or people that are able to give you that consultation, they can give you a much broader perspective, which is, don't just fixate on the relationship and the fear and all those things, emotions that may be overriding you, but think of the larger, bigger picture, which is, this person could be the parent of your child. What if this never gets resolved? What if they end up acting out after you have children? What about your reputation? What about your physical health? What other things are they lying about? Because is it possible that a person could have ongoing affairs, but then not lie about other things that could impact you? So you have to have perspective, and you have to have people who can really help you to come to the decisions that are in your best interest. When we're left to our own devices, or we're only the one who's hurt us is the only person that we're listening to, in addition to our own mind, we can easily be manipulated, easily be gaslighted, easily be manipulated, easily be promised, that oh no, I'll never do this again, and please trust me. But it's only when we're allowed to, be able to really think without that type of influence, and have other positive influence helping us, that I think we can come to better decisions. So it's going to look different basically for every person.
I imagine that a person who has discovered what their spouse has done would feel immense rage, possibly that, oh, am I just the mother around here and the maid while you go around and sleep around? And also the deep self-esteem issues, like a sense of low worth, like, am I so disposable? Am I undesirable? Am I so unlovable? Etc., etc. So how could she go on a path of healing?
Sure. Alhamdulillah. I think this is where, mental health support is really important, because you're absolutely right. No matter the circumstance, the woman will always, especially, there's different scenarios. We talked about that men also get cheated on, but in the context of women, which is the group that I work with the most, and those are the people that I can speak to the most, I've always found that no matter how accomplished, how beautiful, how successful a woman is, there will always be that voice in her head. And sometimes it's society, and even, our people are just so unforgiving, towards women anyway, in some of our cultures, that there is this presumption that she didn't keep her man happy, and that's why he acted out. That's the conclusion that people make, no matter the scenario, that she failed somehow, she was deficient somehow, and therefore that's why he left. And women will absolutely, and it's Iblis, obviously, he's going to feed that lie to you. So he's going to make you think that you are the cause for your spouse to cheat on you. Whereas when you're with a professional and you start to see no, 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 no. You know, this is a spiritual issue. These are spiritual diseases that manifest in a person, and they likely, I mean, they almost in every circumstance, they preceded the relationship. Because if you think about, you know, virtuous behavior, right? People of virtue are virtuous because they live according to a certain code of ethics and values and principles, right? They do not allow themselves to breach those things. They deception, infidelity, all of these things are just not, they're lines, they're red lines that will not get crossed. And of course, there's the religious and spiritual component to that. There's taqwa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitates these things for people who you know, prioritize his pleasure. He will give them that strength. So a person who has those strong moral virtues and noble virtues, I mean noble qualities, they will not do these things. Whereas people who are duplicitous, who have, you know, ulterior, you know, faces and facades and personas that they may be, you know, interchanging here and there, they know how to hide and mask those qualities really well, and then they just end up coming out in a marital context. But they likely were there all along. Because if you know, again, even though the list that I read in the beginning, you know, it started off with like opportunistic as being one of the forms of infidelity, I find that a little, you know, I don't particularly like the wording of that, because it's almost like, oh, if the opportunity didn't arise, that the person wouldn't have done it. And I just don't agree. There are many people who've been presented with ridiculous or inappropriate opportunities, but they have the fear of God and the taqwa and the integrity and the principle and all of that to never even entertain the thought. So it's not so, I feel like it absolves the actor when you make it seem like, oh, it's just the opportunity came and they couldn't help themselves. No, you can help yourself. So yeah, I feel like women need to hear that perspective, that in almost 9 times out of 10 cases, I would say, maybe even more, that the cheater had pathology or had qualities, that the spiritual diseases that kind of like, maybe a good analogy would be autoimmune, you know, diseases, because autoimmune conditions are kind of, they're dormant in the body and then something triggers it. So when you have spiritual diseases, it's kind of like that. They're there, you haven't worked on purging them, but then when an opportunity comes, they manifest. So that gives, I think, women or people who are victims of cheaters a healthy perspective, that it wasn't you that caused it. It was their own spiritual deficiencies that manifested, and they took a chance and did something in, you know, against, you know, the principles of their own faith. I mean, for Muslims anyway, right? They crossed the boundary.
Hosai, tell us about forgiveness and finding peace.
So yeah, I think, you know, this topic of forgiveness is problematic for a lot of people, because the way that it's usually framed is that they have to give back or somehow overlook what the person who's harmed them has done. And that never feels good. It doesn't sound good, especially when you feel like you've been robbed, you've been hurt, you've been betrayed, you've been backstabbed. To have to then, in order for some spiritual, you know, opening, to give more to that person, it doesn't feel right. So I feel like we really need to help people understand that from our faith's perspective, forgiveness is not so much about the person who's harmed you as much as it is about your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and wanting to elevate and wanting to draw near to your creator, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala incentivizes us to be forgiving people. He tells us, right, that those who are forgiving he will be forgiving towards them. So there's this concept of the law of reciprocity, right? That this is always a play in the dunya, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show us in our own lived experiences the qualities that we manifest to others. So those who are generous, he will be generous towards us. Those who are merciful, he will be merciful. Those who are vengeful and wrathful will feel and eventually see his wrath. So likewise, if you're a forgiving person, and this is just something you adopt as a way of being, inshallah, what you're doing is you're investing in your own path with God and saying, I am opening the door of God's forgiveness for me because I am a sinner. I have wronged people. Forget what this person has done to me. I have to be fully honest with myself and say, I have likely harmed people. I've likely said things and done things and thought things. And maybe there's outstanding issues that I don't even know that I have contributed to that has harmed people. And I want to be, when I'm facing my Creator, my slate cleaned, because I was so forgiving towards those who hurt me, that Allah will then forgive me as well for those that I may have inadvertently hurt, and also just for the sinfulness that we we do every day, that we violate God's rules. So we want His forgiveness.
If I might add to that, though, forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to stay.
Right. Absolutely. No, and that's a
Doesn't
very
mean
important
that
point.
I'm accepting this appalling behavior and I'm
Absolutely.
going to be this like saint and
Yeah.
take it. I think that because I read a good book on forgiveness, was it by Fred Luskin, I think, that it doesn't mean that that person didn't do wrong. It's that I'm not going to carry this in my heart. I don't want to
Absolutely.
be somebody who in 10 years' time, I'm still sitting with people and saying, you know what my husband did to me? And you're still bitter and resentful, almost reliving that
Hmm.
angst over. It's just that I'm not going to
Absolutely.
carry this energy with me anymore.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because, how what is practical forgiveness? Well, I think, first of all, it's just the acknowledgement that the person wronged you, and that whatever they did, they're going to get their judgment with God. And that is a consolation, because I think we wind ourselves up, and a lot of our suffering has to do with this need for justice. And we overthink and, go through the whole scenario over and over in our minds, and what we could have done differently and what we should have done and what we wish happens to the person because of what they've done to us. And it's just this constant, pursuit of justice that we're seeking ultimately, right? And so when we stop and remember that justice is inevitable, like Allah has said that justice is inevitable, I don't need to keep thinking about that. I just have to have that yaqeen that Allah will call this person, to whatever they've done against me, and I will get my rights. But like you said, what I'm not going to do is spend the rest of my life exhausting myself and draining myself and letting them take more from me. Because if they took 5 years, 10 years from you, they hurt you, they betrayed you, they took your trust, they shook your foundation, then by harping or wallowing or allowing to yourself to ruminate over and over and over again, and let take that poison, that bitter poison every day, you are dying a painful, emotional, slow death. And I've seen people do that. They cannot get over it. And it's because resentment that's what it is. It's like a weed. And as you know, if you have a garden, weeds are so impossible. You think you kill them, or you take them out, but then they keep growing. And so how do you disrupt that? What does it look like practically? Well, like you said, removing yourself from the source of the pain is important, because and it's a foolish, honestly, to think that you can just, on a whim, decide to forgive someone. It doesn't work that way, because some people think like, oh, someone cheated on me or whatever it is, a betrayal, I'm just gonna I'll deal with it and it'll be fine. But I think you have to be more realistic and say, if there's a path for that, for some people, maybe they can do that. It will be arduous, it will be difficult, because there will always be, some level of pain. But if you've come to that point where you know for a fact that this is just something unforgivable, like unforgivable in the sense that I can't continue to be with you. I can potentially forgive you, for in the akhirah, and work out like my heart, in terms of the betrayal, but I don't want to be with you. I don't want to continue this relationship on this false hope that I can suddenly erase it overnight. It doesn't work that way. So if you come to that point, then remove yourself from the situation and distance yourself from the grasp of that person. Because when a person has wronged another and they haven't yet received the forgiveness that they are hope that they can get, they will find ways to keep a connection, to keep a tether to you. But all they're doing is taking your energy. All they're doing is distracting you from your own forward path away from them. So I would say really try to find a way to disconnect completely if you can, have very limited contact. That looks like, no, you cannot just call me and access me whenever you want. I don't want you sending me text messages. That looks like if you need to communicate anything to me, you communicate it to my advocate, which could be, your relative, a lawyer, if a lawyer is involved, whoever it is that you've appointed as being the mediator can take on the communication, so to spare you and to also block them from having that type of access to you, because again, it'll help you to overcome the pain and the hurt and to really put yourself on a path of healing if you don't have that person in your ear constantly and constantly able to access you. I feel like, to me, it's like opening, like you're trying to heal a wound, but then you keep opening it. It keeps getting torn, ripped open. Every time they call, every time they text you, every time you're reminded of their presence, it will feel like, you're just now having to go right back to day one of healing. So put some distance first between you and that person, and then the mental health therapist, or if you have a spiritual guide, someone that you can really rely on for just processing, right? Let's talk it through and making sure that you have the right perspective about what happened and how none of it was your fault. And if if you feel like maybe, because we have to be honest and fair. If you feel that there are mistakes made on your end, be fine. Admit that, okay, I made some mistakes, but to take on the cheating as a root cause is just not acceptable. Because that falls squarely on the cheater. That's they're the actors. They're the ones that are accountable. And like the Quran says, no soul is responsible for another person's sinfulness, right? So don't let your mind go there. But that's where a mental health professional or a spiritual guide can really help you.
What does one do if she separates from her spouse and she knows that this person is going to do the same thing to somebody else? Don't you think there's some kind of responsibility to call that person out to prevent another woman from being in a situation? Because some people might have addictions. They might be addicted to pornography. They might, just be seeing sex workers routinely. And that the way that they present themselves in the community might be totally different.
Right. So I think this is where, Islam does have to have protocol about, in the event that a person has knowledge that could potentially harm other people, and they are asked about that they do offer, their perspective. So it could be in the case of a business relationship, or in the case of a marriage, that if you have knowledge that you feel could, potentially, or you have knowledge that would help the person who's making these decisions to choose, right, with informed consent, or to know more, then yes, you are expected to disclose that. But to broadcast that to the general public is not from our faith. It's really a matter of, if you're asked specifically, like if someone, again is. Mhm.
Sorry, Hosai, just to cut you there, but sometimes you're not going to be approached and asked. Like, what if, for example, it's a religious figure, and you see this now happening, where they are loved in the community and no one knows that this is what's going on behind closed doors, and the woman is very quiet and she divorces quietly, and then he goes on and does the same thing to other women. Shouldn't that?
Yeah, that's a definite, that's an exception, because a public figure is different, right? A public figure is someone who is presenting themselves as a person of authority, and spiritual, spiritual authority or spiritual guide, and then they're doing these things. Of course, that's we have to mention those things. We have to warn people, because they're very dangerous people. They can mislead people, they can harm people, they can do a lot more. So in that case, yes, people need to be informed. But how we do it, I think, just because I've seen these scandals that break out, and there's this whole mob sort of mentality that everybody has, kind of jumps on these cases, and then things get lost and distorted, and there's no clarity about anything. That actually causes, I think, a lot of harm in the community. So I think there has to be, a due process of how we make sure we warn people. And so if there's a committee, if there's other scholars in a particular area that can be entrusted with that knowledge, then it's on them. But to take it to maybe a public square or to just freely speak about these things, I would say be cautious about that, because we also want to maintain and preserve the wholeness of the community. And these things can cause a lot of, I mean, people have, anyway, with past situations that have been made very public, we've come to learn that people, have suddenly, my faith is in question because I can't believe that, this teacher that I followed is doing these things. And then that has a ripple effect, and people start to really, stop coming to certain masajid or coming to certain things, don't take from certain teachers who are affiliated with certain teachers. So it actually can cause a lot of damage if we're not responsible in the way that we are protecting our community members from wolves in sheep's clothing. We have to do it in a responsible way. So the responsibility is to take it to other leadership and make sure that they know who is causing this type of harm. And then it's on them to warn the community in a responsible way, but not for, I think, individuals to take that on, as a mission for themselves, because, oh, we have to warn people. Don't put yourself in harm's way that way. Put it on the people that Allah has appointed to protect the community, which is the religious leadership, even against their own. So even if it's someone who was their buddy and who was in the boys club or the girl, whatever club, there was, if they have to warn people, let them do that. That's their charge. It's not the average person's responsibility. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to how does one prevent infidelity in their future relationships? And linked to that, I remember you saying earlier that that husband that was seeing a sex worker, it's because he didn't feel that he was free enough to make these requests from his wife. So there's a miscommunication there.
Sure,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. So could that have looked differently? And that's the one thing. And then also to, in general, just to mitigate the chances of this happening with a future marriage.
Yeah, I mean, I think prevention is always difficult because we can't obviously see into the future. It's ideal that we could prevent these things. Inshallah, we can. But I feel like real talk, the best prevention is communication and really thinking about, all of these things as openly as you can before the marriage. So premarital counseling, I think, is so essential. And unfortunately, it's not standard practice still everywhere. I think it should be that a couple cannot get married by the, masajid or by a sheikh or whatever body that they're seeking a nikah contract from. They cannot be issued that legal Islamic marriage until and unless they go through a period of premarital counseling where a lot of these things can be worked out, and obviously that would require full disclosure and transparency on the part of the couple, which is where it gets a little challenging because, as I mentioned before, cheaters and people who are deceptive and people who kind of have masks, they may play the part, they may come to each session of counseling and do their part, and then their true colors are revealed later. So realistically, we do our part and we put our trust in God, but we also have to know that there's no fail-proof system here because human beings are complicated and people have spiritual diseases. But I think if you have standards of what you're looking for that are in line with what you with conduct that hopefully protects against these things. For example, I mean, I know people who marry without even considering the person's not base of practice, like what's their how consistent are they in their practice, how much knowledge do they have they done any study at all, do they have a spiritual guide? There are people who don't really ask those questions. It's just kind of like, oh, who's your favorite scholar, and have you read this book? And it's like, I don't think that's very superficial. I think you need to actually have better standards in terms of behavior that would at least give you some sense of security. Like if a person has studied and they've been in good sahba and they have like a spiritual guide, and they by consensus of everybody that knows them, they're active members of their community, and their character is proof of that, right? They're very involved in beautiful works, and they're very, you know what I mean? Like all of those things are actually going to hopefully give you some semblance of security that this person is, you know, walking the walk. They're not just talking the talk. But if you are, first of all, you know, meeting people on these apps and dating people randomly, and there's no real vetting happening, and then you expect them to attend some preliminary premarital counseling sessions as a condition of marriage, then I still think that's a big risk, because where's the proof of their character? You can't just take people for face value anymore. You actually have to see real work.
And
So,
honestly, this is a big, big challenge when it comes to marrying, whether you are single and wanting to marry or divorced and wanting to remarry, is that when you get onto these matrimonial apps, you've got no idea what this person is like. And I've got a friend where she asks certain questions when she is speaking to somebody on these apps, and she'll ask them, are you somebody who has had premarital sex? Not something that you've done ages ago and now you've reformed, it's been Toba, but is this something that you do? And the other question was, do you engage in pornography? And
yeah,
I just think to myself, like, what makes you think that they're going to answer honestly?
exactly. They likely will not. They won't. I
Yeah.
mean, who would do that, right? And I
But
agree with you.
amazingly, she's told me that there are people who have answered honestly. They said, yes, I have had a few physical relationships, and yes, I have. Wow. And then for her, that, of course, she politely ends
Sure.
it and says this is a deal breaker, of course. But it is
Yeah.
very challenging, Hosai, because we're so fragmented. Like you can't, call up a community in Nebraska or in Florida and find out about this random person, you know?
Well, and I agree that it is more difficult, but I think we also have to have processes that put the onus on the pursuer, right? If you're pursuing someone, it's not my job to chase after your references. It's your job to provide me with references, right? So I would say to any woman who is being pursued, first of all, I mean, I have a lot of ideas about the way that we give access to people who are, you know, interested. I think we should be much more cautious and not be so accessible as the first line or a direct line. If a man is interested in any woman, whether she's single, divorced, it doesn't matter. He's genuinely interested. He will pursue whatever path to get access that you request of him. So if that means talking to my friend, talking to my dad, talking to my brother, whoever, talking to my sheikh, but I'm not speaking to you, at least for the first, you know, preliminary phase of this courtship, you're not going to have any access to me. He'll do that. And I think that is that buffer is so essential these days, because what I've found is that there are a lot of predators out there, and women are vulnerable because we want to be married. They're single, they're married, they're divorced. So they're seeking marriage and they're putting it all out there because the competition is just, there's too many. There's a lot of women in these matrimonial websites as well as the services. And we have plenty of them. We just had one recently here in the Bay Area, Hafardine and others, where they come and they do these services. There's always the imbalance. There's more women than men. So what happens is women think that if I'm as, you know, transparent as possible and I put everything out there, all my preferences, my pictures, direct communication with me, that I'm going to be able to do this process easier. And I'll just, like you said, with your friend, ask these questions and boom, boom, boom. But I feel like we're making it very easy for people. And I know that that sounds counterintuitive, because it's like, wait a second, the pool is so large and now you're asking me to be a little bit more restrictive. But I feel like I would much rather, if I was in the place of a single woman, have a man prove himself to me that he's truly seeking to, you know, he has true interest in me by, you know, going through a few different prerequisite processes. That gives me some assurance, because like you said, we're just in a time where we just really don't know who we're dealing with anymore, and we have to almost in a way give people opportunities to prove their mettle. You know, show me your integrity, show me before I even say yes, I need to see that you're a person of true, weight. And there's just too many of these flippant, because there's, that's what predators do, that they're flippant, they're kind of like, oh, you're not going to give me access, then I'll just move on. And and they're doing you a favor, actually, if they're just willing to move on, khalas, thank you for not wasting my time. And then hopefully the more serious, credible men will show up, and they'll be like, oh, you need me to do this, you need me to do that, like something a lot of women don't think about, which I think is absolutely should be standard practice, is requiring medical records. Like, why are we okay with not doing that when people have sexually transmitted diseases? And I know of horrific cases where people have contracted them because they, on total like good faith, believed that a person was moral and upright and whatever, and then they get married and then they find out, oh my God, well, no, why did you think that was inappropriate to ask for in this day and age where people, it's a hookup cultures everywhere. Even in the Muslim community, people are hooking up. So yes, require medical records to make sure that they are clear of any weird things before you allow that person into your life. I mean, I know that sounds maybe way too over the top for some people, but no, if I had a daughter, there's no way you're getting married to her until I see what you have going on there. So anyway, I have a lot of opinions about that, but I feel like women need to really have someone else do a lot of that legwork for them, whether it's the other person who's pursuing you, or even if you have like a wing woman or a couple. I always prefer that a woman has a couple that she relies on to help vet people, that you will really protect your heart and yourself from a lot of the nonsense out there. We don't need to be involved in that process.
I also do find it a positive sign when a man says, you're welcome to talk to my ex-wife.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a great indication of transparency and honesty. And hopefully she is also someone who's, not just being paid or I don't know, who knows, it's just such a strange time, but we don't know what to believe anymore. But I think asking for those references is really important because, people, if you're a hidden person in the community, that's also to me a bit of an issue, because what's going on? Why aren't you known by the imam and the sheikhs and the teachers? Where's the proof of your Islam? If in the masjid nobody can vouch for you, as a man, that's a bit problematic for me, because men are responsible for for creating that sense of community. And that's not to say that more introverted and shy kind of meek men should be written off, but I think if nobody can vouch for you, they don't even see you, they've never seen you at the masjid, for sure that's a red flag.
100%.
So yeah.
Hosai, in closing, if there's somebody out there right now who is struggling in a situation where she's with an unfaithful spouse, what advice would you give?
I would say, dear sister, or an even brother, if you feel that there's someone that, I mean, for anybody who's going through this, I think the most important thing is to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us that we are going to be tested, some of us, in our relationships. And if you find yourself with absolute knowledge, like it's proven to you that this has happened to you, that you are a victim of someone who's cheated on you, to first and foremost see that tests in this life are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if the sabab, the means of those tests are people, you're going through a big tribulation. So now you have to pause and see what is the end game here, right? Reacting, as I said, and getting emotionally involved and kind of losing comportment, losing your rational mind and just falling apart, that's going to, I mean, we can't always help these things. Obviously, we're emotional creatures. This is a very devastating thing. So I'm not in any way dismissing that may happen. But the response that we have is, whenever a calamity befalls, what are we supposed to do? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we exemplify sabrun jameel. Sabrun jameel is at the strike of the calamity, the moment that the reality hits you that, oh my God, this is devastating. that we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance and for strength. And we just make a lot of dua. Like dua is so essential in that moment. And once you have, purged, you're going to maybe go through a night of blood. I mean, your bed sheets and your pillowcases will be, soaked with your tears. You may be crying yourself to sleep for days, but you have to remember, this is a test, it's a tribulation, and there is always a path out. We don't fall into despair. We don't lose our minds and think this is like my world is over. When we have our faith and we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will always succeed. And that has to be like embedded into the heart of the believer. If you have your Lord, your creator, and your faith, you are already a winner, no matter the circumstances you're put into in this life. And so don't lose those things. Don't lose your faith. Don't let Iblis come in and convince you that your world is falling apart and you'll never have anything good and blah, blah, blah. He's a liar, a deceiver. Turn to Allah and then give yourself time to purge the initial shock. Give yourself time and do not compromise or undermine, I should say. Do not undermine the position you're in by reacting, by springing into action. Stop, wait, give yourself time to think about what you need to do next. And if you can't do that for whatever reason, then please entrust someone to help you, someone who's level-headed, even-keeled, has taqwa, all those beautiful virtues. Only one person. You don't need a team of people. I know it seems like it's an emergency urgent service or situation, which it is in many ways, but hopefully that one confidant who's really upright and God-fearing can help you to make those decisions. And I would say if you don't have that person, that's essential. Every Muslim out there should be able to identify, in the event of any calamity, who would I go to? Who would I go to? Who would I turn to as a source of comfort and also needing counsel? And if you haven't done that thought process to be able to identify that person, please do it now, because we need those types of people in our lives. And it's sad that, because I talk with people all the time who are like, I don't know anybody like that. I'm like, oh yeah, Allah, that's a problem that needs to be resolved. Find someone, look for a teacher, look for someone, but don't be floating in this dunya without a confidant. I mean, even the Prophet ﷺ, the beloved of God, had confidants in his life all around him. So anyway, but inshallah, Allah will help you through this calamity. And as long as you remember, if you have God and your faith, no matter what is happening to you, you will get through it, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Great discussion, Hosai, and we hope that we will see you again, and may Allah bless you and your family.
Barakallah fiki. Thank you so much for all that you do, for all the support that you give to the community. May Allah give you continued tawfiq, and thank you for your patience with me and putting this
وإياكي جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.